Okay, so this is the first drawing of the facial anatomy practice. So we're going to work with eye number 1. So this is marked in the slideshow. The first thing we're going to do is start with the curve of the upper eyelid. So when you're working with this, I would start with your HB pencil and just sketch this curve going upward. And we are drawing the right eye, and we can tell that because in the photo, you can see the tear duct on this side. So the tear duct is always closest to the nose. Now with this particular eye that we're drawing, this curve of the inside part of the eye is going to come down lower than the outside line. And so with this line, it's going to stop about here or so, and then there's just kind of a soft curve like that. And we want to carry this line down further. So if this is where this curve is, so kind of in the middle of that curve, we just want to make sure that we get this a little bit further down. And after this line ends, I'm going to come back up just a little bit higher, and then I'm going to make a slightly slanted line that's going to mark where the tear duct would be. And then what's going to happen, this is going to drop down just a little bit, and it's going to curve back up to this point. So as you're drawing this, just make sure that you are sketching the entire time. Don't get stuck on one line, because then it may not be the shape that you are needing. So after we have that drawn, next thing we're going to do, we're going to draw the inside part of the eye. In this case, we're going to draw the circle that is the iris. So if you notice in the picture, the iris does not come all the way down to this bottom line, but there is a little bit of a space. So we can make a slight mark here. And then we're going to draw a circle, but we don't see the entire circle. So the top part of this iris circle is going to be hidden underneath the upper eyelid. So when drawing the iris, you really want to make sure you get that rounded circular shape. So you want to try and get as close of a circle as you can as you're drawing. So you probably have to make quite a few sketch marks to get that. So this is misshapen. So we do need a better circle than that. So we can erase just a little bit. So if you notice there's still quite a bit of space on the area that's closest to the tear duct. So that looks a lot better. And after you get the circle for the iris sketched out, what I would recommend doing is if you just try and put a plus sign that's pretty much in the immediate middle of the iris, this will help you place the pupil. So this line's a little too low that we initially sketched, so I'm going to sketch this going across. And so what this is going to do, it's going to help us with the placement of the pupil. So there is this rounded light reflection that you can see in the photo. Now, I want to make sure I include that. So in this one part of the circle that's divided into 4s, I'm just going to sketch that kind of rounded shape that the light reflection is making. So this appears to be some type of like studio light or ring type lamp. And then there's kind of like a smaller partial circle inside of this ring. Now the light reflection doesn't go all the way up to this line. It's going to stop a little bit short. So we can just lightly mark this, and then we'll come back and add those values in a minute. So after we have this light reflection, we want to put the pupil. So the pupil is the darkest area of the eye, typically the darkest part of the portrait. So it's going to be pretty black and dark. But again, we want to make sure we have a nice rounded circular shape for this. So I'm still using my HB pencil, but I'm going to want to come back in and use maybe my 4B or 6B for this pupil part. Next thing that we're going to draw the tear duct. And so there's just really two lines we're going to focus on for the tear duct. So wherever you see this curve kind of stop and it starts to flatten out right here, we're going to draw a diagonal like this, and then another line that's parallel to that. So that'll be about here. So we have these two lines, they're right next to one another, fairly parallel. And we have some light reflections in the membrane where the tear duct is. So I'm going to draw that as well. Just sketch those in, and then we'll add values to those in a minute. So next area where I'm going to put pencil marks, I'm going to make this upper eyelid fold. And so if we look at the photo, there's kind of a line that we drew a while ago that splits this curve in half. Wherever this ends over here, this is basically where the upper eyelid fold stops. And so it's a little bit wider in this area, and it kind of tapers out just a little. There's another kind of folded line that is going to meet about right there. And above the iris, it's a little bit thinner. So in this space, it's not nearly as wide as what we have here. So if I just kind of make that mark, and then I'll connect this over here. So you still want to sketch. And then this will just continue over this way. And what it is going to create, it's going to create a couple different creases. And so this is what is known as the crow's feet. So this is the corner part of the outside part of the eye. All right, so now I'm going to move to a different pencil so I can use my 4B pencil. And what I'm going to do to start, I am going to put some pencil values down on the upper eyelid. So I'm going to go about halfway to where the middle of the pupil is going to be. And maybe darken some of these folds where the crow's feet are. Then I'm going to darken along this line. So it emphasizes that fold in the skin for the upper eyelid. And after this, I'm going to use my tortillon to blend some of these values in. So with my tortillon that I'm going to use, I'm just going to go over these marks. And if you're having problems blending your pencil values, you may just need to take a little bit of sandpaper or the sanding blocks that we have in class and kind of scuff up your tortillon. And then it should blend a lot better. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go along this line with my tortillon, and then what happens is this part of the eye does get a little bit lighter, so this part of the eyelid. And there's a little bit of texture because there is some light reflecting. So if I just use my tortillon, I'm just going to make these kind of like short, almost stippled hatch lines to show that there's a little more texture in this area. And then as we get to this part, it gets pretty light. So I'll just continue with these hatch marks. And then I'll just really kind of space them out once I get to the end of the eye. So we do see some eyelashes, but we'll come back to those. That'll be one of the last things that we do with this drawing. It's a little bit darker right here. So we're going to work with the iris next. So this is the area where there is color. So I'm going to use my 4B pencil, and I am actually going to color in where the pupil would be first. So just add dark values, basically just cover up that circle that we started with. And then from there, I'm going to use radial symmetry. So what that means is I'm going to take my pencil and I'm just going to make hatch lines like this. So I'm going to go all the way around except for where we have this light reflection. And these hatch lines should cover up that plus sign that we drew at the very beginning. Now, what you're also seeing in the photo is, and what happens, the upper eyelid, because it sticks out and it covers part of the iris, it creates this shadow. So the very top of the iris is going to be just a little bit darker than the bottom. So as you're working with this, just keep with the hatch marks that start on the pupil and work their way out. Try and fill up all the little flecks of white paper. And then once we start to make our way to the lower portion of the iris, it lightens up just a bit. Now, there's a little bit of texture right here inside of this light reflection, so we don't want to forget that. And this is pretty dark on the edges. And once we start working with the other parts of the iris, so there are some darker areas down below, but they're a little more sporadic. We don't want to do all of this dark because then it'll just blend in with the top, and we need those darker values at the top to make it look like there's a shadow above that iris. Now, what you can also do, and what you're seeing in the photograph, there are some like lighter areas kind of in this ring of the iris. So I can take my eraser and almost use it like a pencil with hatch lines. And I'm just gonna erase some areas right here. And so what that does, it helps give that lighter textured effect. And then around the iris there, or around the pupil, there are some darker marks. So I'll go back in, and essentially what I'm doing, I'm just layering that part of the iris. I'm going to push these a little bit darker. So really practice controlling your pencil and the amount of pressure that you're applying. So what we're going to do next is we're going to use our tortillon to add value to where the white of the eye is, or what's known as the sclera. So our light source is coming in from this direction. So this side is going to be darker, and as you're applying these tortillon marks, I'm not even going to put pencil down. I'm just using the pencil that's left on my tortillon. Make sure that these curve. So we do have this dark shadow that's created by the eyelashes right above. So our very first line started here, and I want to really emphasize that dark value. So if I just use these really kind of short hatch marks, that'll kind of bring some of those back. And darken right there in the corner. accidentally made that line a little too long. And then keep working with my tortillon. So really there isn't going to be any plain wet paper on this part of the eye. And on this side, there is some value. It's, you know, lots of light grays. So when you're working with your tortillon on this side, just don't press very hard. So that way you keep that lighter effect. It's a little bit darker right here. Now, around the ring of the iris, it diffuses itself into the sclera or the white of the eye. So I'm going to take my tortillon and just essentially, I'm going to follow around the edges so I can darken this area and kind of soften it just a bit. And if I need to, I can use my pencil and go back and darken that ring a little. So whenever you use your tortillons, it'll always lighten up, you know, the darkest areas of your drawing. So you may just have to touch that up. Okay, so the tear duct needs a little bit of value too, so I can use my tortillon and just set value in there. And then remember, we don't want to cover up these light reflections. I'm just going to work around those. And the bottom eyelid's going to be a little bit different. So at the bottom eyelid, there's the inside part, which we can do with our tortillon. I'm not even going to use my pencil. I'll just use my tortillon. It's a little bit darker right here. And then it kind of lightens up just a little bit. And then with my tortillon, I'm just going to follow along this bottom line that we started with. So you don't need to press too hard because we want it fairly light. And then underneath this line that we just added with our tortillon, I'm going to use my pencil and I'm going to use my 4B because it's really soft. I can get these pencil marks to blend in. But underneath the inside eyelid fold, it is lighter, and then underneath that, it's going to be darker. So I'm just putting down these pencil marks. And then I'll use my tortillon to kind of fade this out because it gets lighter near the tear duct. And so with this part of the eye, it kind of curves just a little bit this way. So that's why I'm using my tortillon to kind of blend and curve these pencil marks that I've just made. And then these dark marks do fade out just a little. And then it gets pretty bright along this area. So where the inside part of the eyelid is light right here and dark right here, it starts to switch. So it's darker right here and that gets lighter in this part. So remember, if you over darken something with this, as you're working with the lower portion of the eyelid, you can use your eraser and kind of erase back some of those highlights. So let's say, for example, I'm going to just darken this a little bit more than I should. So because this area is lighter, it needs to have that kind of like shine to it. So that's where, you know, if I do over darken that, I can use my eraser and kind of pull parts out, kind of bring back some of that light texture. You can even stipple with your eraser if you need to. So I'll block some of this light so you can see it so far. All right, so now I'm gonna start working with my eyelashes. So I want a fairly dark pencil, but I need it to hold its line so it doesn't get too soft. So I'm gonna use my B pencil. And with the eyelashes, you wanna not overdo them. So the main thing is to notice in the photo is that the tallest eyelash does come above this eyelid fold, maybe about here, but then they start to get shorter as they move this way. Now, the eyelashes on this side of the eye for the upper eyelid, they curve out like this, and then they start to curve the opposite way here. For the lower part of the eyelid, they curve like this, and then they start to curve like that. So just keep that in mind. So for the upper eyelashes, I'm going to start on the line that we drew at the beginning. And if you use just real quick hatch lines like this, you'll get a point. So always start on the line that we drew. And then just make sure you don't overdo it. So when you start adding way too many eyelashes or putting them where they're not supposed to be, it can distort the look of your eye. And then for the corner of the eye, these eyelashes start to kind of like flatten out this way. So we're gonna start to curl these here. You know, you can make some of them cross over a little bit. That helps add some realism. So once we get to this point, they don't pass the upper eyelid. They basically just kind of stop there. And then they start to kind of change their direction. So you have some that pointed downward. There's some down here that do that. So they do lighten up quite a bit. So for the lower eyelid, they're a little bit different. They're not going to start on this line. They actually start where we worked with this dark area. And we want these to curve. And so the lower eyelashes aren't nearly as dense or long. So just keep that in mind. And then they really kind of disappear and stop on this particular eye about here. Now for the eyelashes that are in the corner, these are out of focus. So this is going to be pretty similar to what we did with the Pepsi can, where if you take your tortillon and just go over them a little bit, it'll kind of take them out of sharpness, so it'll take them out of focus. And same with the upper ones, just a little. And what it does, it allows these lower eyelashes to stay in focus. So there are a few areas I can touch up. So for example, there's this shadow underneath the upper eyelid is a little bit darker. So I can go back over these and emphasize that dark value a little bit more. This is probably needs to be a little bit darker above the iris. And then I can blend this in, so I have to be careful so I don't lose some of the texture of those eyelashes that I just created. And then there is a darker shadow right here. So this is pretty dark. That'll just help emphasize that upper eyelid fold that we were working with. I could probably even darken this area, the corner of the eye, just a little bit. And around this ring of light, this is actually kind of soft too. So I can take my tortillon and just go around the edge of it. And then just very lightly, I'm just going to make some marks inside right there. And I can probably still kind of like soften up around the outer edge of the iris too. So that way it has that diffused appearance. If you get the sclera or the white part of the eye a little too dark, you can take your eraser and erase parts of it also. So I apologize for the light reflection. I didn't realize the light was that strong. So I'm going to darken this corner just a little bit more. Probably going to need a little more pencil. So putting your marks down in a curved fashion is important because it helps show that the eyeball is rounded. Okay, so that is eye number 1. Next video will cover eye number 2. So this eye will be a left eye where we just worked with the right eye. So next video will cover the left eye.